Most people who buy a talisman don't understand what they're holding. They've purchased a fancy piece of jewelry with a fun story attached, not a carefully crafted divine tool imbued with the celestial marrow of the heaven. The difference between these two things is the difference between holding a rock and working with the spirit of the planetary hierarchies themselves. Over the last 9 years, I have made nearly 500 talismans from the tradition of astrological talismans present in Picatrix, Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, and Ficino's 3 books on life. I've also seen what happens when talismans are made poorly, or worse, sold deceptively. This video is about helping you make sure you never spend money on something that was never a talisman, that was never alive to begin with. Now let me start with the foundation, because without this, the rest of the video will not make any sense. A talisman, as I'm referring to it, in this tradition of the grimoires Picatrix and Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, refer to a ritually ensouled object at a specific moment of astrological time, called an election. At this time, the talisman is engraved with specific symbols, using specific materials, and following a unique ritual procedure involving incense and herbs in order to create this talisman, essentially giving birth to the talisman at this time. This is why we say a talisman is an ensouled object in this tradition. Just in the same way, humans, when we're born, we have soul. This tradition also asserts that each one of these specific steps matter. Remove one of materials, incense, ritual procedures, or make enough mistakes. Remove one of these essential components, and instead of a glorious astrological talisman, you have a fun little craft project. When looking to buy or make an astrological talisman from these traditions, it's important to understand what it is and what it is not. And it's this distinction where, a lot of the times in the marketplace, sellers and providers fail you. A piece of metal with a planetary sigil or glyph stamped on it, with a paragraph explaining to you its deep meaning, does not make a talisman. A picture of a lion is not a lion. A lion has teeth and fangs and has a certain presence about it. And a ring that has never been consecrated and ensouled during a proper astrological election with correct materials, prayers said over it, is not a talisman, even though it may be talisman-shaped. Now, let's say you've decided to buy a real astrological talisman. How do you decide which one to buy? There are 2 fundamental frameworks I like to use when answering this question. Number 1 has to do with what is your core desire? Maybe let's say, what is your true will? Something that goes beyond mere intention and starts to articulate the result you're wanting to accomplish in your life with the talisman. And we need to go beyond vibes, beyond what's nice to have. Picatrix gets very specific about the kinds of results one can attain with the astrological talisman. Heck, I even have case studies on 7 astrological talismans I've made and the truly transformative results they've been able to lend to me in my practice of this magic. We need to align our goals with the powers the planets are said to provide. The sun gives authority, leadership, and the ability to attract the masses to one's ideas. Venus is going to promote harmony, beauty, longevity, and artistic expression, not protection in legal battles. It's Mars who governs litigation, victory, and courageous action. If you ask Venus to help you win a court case, you've potentially chosen a suboptimal spirit to help you achieve your goal. The failure to attain a result isn't due to any problem in the talisman or the election per se, but more of a failure of the selection process one uses to pick a talisman. We want to make sure our expected result aligns with the purpose of the talisman, which can also depend on what the maker intended when they ensouled it during the election. The second framework to overlay onto this process has to do with aligning the talisman to one's natal chart. Now, I'm about to say something that may make talismanic sellers a little uncomfortable, and yes, I know and understand there's always exceptions to general rules and principles. But I'll say it here, not everyone should be using one of every kind of talisman. There are some talismans that are better suited to individuals based off of their natal chart and what they tend to do day in, day out in their lives. I think this is something that is better articulated in Iranian, Vedic, and Tibetan forms of astrological magic that have a more robust set of tools and analyses and diagnostics for determining one's natal relationship to various forms of astrological magic, including talismans. Consider if a planet rules malefic houses in your natal chart. 6, 8, 12, houses of obstruction, enemies, loss. Wearing a talisman that lords those houses could be bringing more of those qualities into your life, rather than helping you achieve your goal. Thus, you end up in a situation where you end up amplifying the problems in life you're trying to escape, which no one wants. Also consider the general dignity of the planet in your chart. Even for someone who is in Aries or Scorpio rising, where Mars should be quite friendly to us. If the Mars is heavily afflicted in the natal chart, a Mars talisman could bring more obstacles, confrontation, and challenging situations that the individual may not have the power to overcome. The talisman has brought them the areas of life, the circumstances to find tremendous success. And because it's Mars, and Mars is giving us martial situations and circumstances for us to rise in power and conquest, if we don't feel comfortable with using the tools of Mars, we're not going to be able to find success. We're going to be bogged down by it instead. As one begins to wrap their heads around these principles, it becomes quite clear the importance of getting outside counsel to help evaluate which talisman is better for one person versus another. For instance, I'm going to disclose something that many practitioners feel is too private to disclose publicly, and that is about my own chart as it pertains to astrological magic. For me, Mars rules a mix of both benefic and dark houses, indicating it could produce mixed results. But I have made a Mars talisman, which I've talked about in my case study videos quite thoroughly, that produced tremendously powerful and life-changing results. How is this possible? Well, I understood the risks. I could see in the election the areas of life the talisman should be affecting, and I organized my material circumstances appropriately so I could handle the effects that may be coming because of the election. I also elected a time that emphasized Mars's courtly and strategic aspects rather than his wild battlefield level aspects. I was also under life circumstances that truly demanded the level of expertise and skills that Mars had to offer, and that could be particularly brought out using amethyst, a unique Mars material. I share this because there is a common rule. If a planet is afflicted in the natal chart, do not use their talismans. And that's good for users of talismans. But as makers of talismans, I think through the lens of astrology, we should be able to see what will happen before it does with the astrological chart. If the person selling you a talisman cannot or refuses to have a conversation about how the planetary energies that they have harnessed in the talisman is probably going to interact with you, your natal chart, and the life that you live, this is indeed a warning sign. This knowledge and these methods are knowable and learnable. And if one is stepping into the role of talisman maker, we should have this level of understanding to provide guidance for our clients. How to evaluate the quality of a talisman. Now here is where we separate dedicated practitioners from just marketplace opportunists or mere hobbyists of talisman making. Here are 6 criteria you should use to evaluate talismans, whether you are buying them or deciding to make them yourselves. Number 1, the materials. What are you making this talisman out of? How do these materials relate to your goal in the planetary hierarchy in which you're ensouling inside of it? All of these should align up perfectly. Picatrix explicitly states, let the aforesaid thing be in correspondence to one another, and let them reflect the powers and influences of the planet that rule the working. For a solar talisman, you want materials made out of rubies, garnets, and bloodstones. Stones referenced in Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy and Albertus Magnus's On Minerals. For Venus, lapis lazuli and carnelian. Mars, diamond and carnelian. If someone is trying to sell you a Venus talisman without any connection or relation to the traditional materials and their correspondences, then it's not something that's part of this lineage of transmission, and potentially not even a Venus talisman. Thus, they've skipped the most fundamental step of the talisman making process. Number 2, the election, the time in which the talisman was made. What was the astrological configuration of the planets and stars at the moment the talisman was ensouled? Fundamentally, you have the right to know the electional chart for every astrological talisman being sold. No questions asked. Definitely no excuses. If the seller cannot share with you the election they used, probably one wasn't used at all, and you should not be buying from them. Now, an electional chart at a minimum should have the planet and main significator in essential dignity, the moon moving fast and not under 12.5 degrees of average daily motion, the main significator and the moon not applying to any malefics or making any malefic aspects, and have the main significator angular on the ascendant or the midheaven of the chart election. Astrological talismans should also be made during planetary day or planetary hour, with many practitioners opting to require mandatorily planetary hour. Now, there is no such thing as a perfect election. Anyone actually putting their life on the line and making these understands that. But they are certainly a foundational set of principles that each election should share. Let me be living proof that you don't need a theoretically perfect election to have incredible results that rewire the fabric of your entire life. And to provide full transparency, I am going to share below my list of 12 principles that I most wholeheartedly try to follow from Picatrix and all the talismans that I create. I also have made 7 talisman case studies showing you the exact elections of talismans that I've made are for sale and the effects that they have had for me. Number 3, the celestial image. How are we going to draw down the celestial spirit from the planetary hierarchy of our desires into the object? In Picatrix and Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy provide very specific images, numbers, tables, and glyphs of the planets for us to use in astrological magic. And true experts of this tradition are able to create their own images based on these principles. These images aren't decorative. Looking nice and having a good vibe are not the end-all be-all or the motivating factor for the images of a talisman. If it looks beautiful, awesome, but it doesn't need to. These images are visual signatures so that the spirits of the celestial realm are able to understand where it is in material reality they are meant to inhabit. Number 4, the suffumigation. What was the incense used during the ensoulment ritual? Picatrix is very explicit on the role incense plays in the ensoulment of a talisman, literally being the stream that connects our material world to the celestial realm. Thus, the incense we use has a direct one-to-one correlation of the nature of the spirit that is getting ensouled and the efficacy of the talisman. In this way, the incense is the metaphorical golden chain that connects the heavenly realms and our material realm. For instance, a solar suffumigation may call for frankincense, saffron, and aloes wood. A Mars talisman may call for the burning of odoriferous woods. If these are left out, then it wasn't a martial or solar spirit that was called down. It's something different. If we were to skip incense entirely, then that chain is broken. Number 5, the prayer and incantation. What kinds of prayers, hymns, and chants are we using to call the spirit into the talisman? I use the Orphic hymns following the recommendation of Pico della Mirandola, who states in his list of aphorisms that the Orphic hymns are excellent for creating results of natural magic, and has been a principle that's caught on with the general theme of astrological magic in this so-called Western astrological magic tradition. Other practitioners use the petition texts that are present in Picatrix, which I have also used to good extent, and I know others who like to create their own versions of petitions, prayers, and poems to the planets. Albertus Magnus believed that this aspect, prayers, hymns, and praises to the planets, weren't essential, so you can make talismans without saying anything. But it is good to know, specifically, if the person making your talisman imbued it with any request or intention while it was getting made. And if they do, they should disclose this. Number 6, the operator. Who was it who made this talisman, and in what state were they in? There's many places in Picatrix where it encourages, almost requires the practitioner to be in a state of devotion to the divine, of piety, and operating in a sense where they desire to benefit those with the knowledge that they glean from the stars and celestial bodies. It's important to consider that a talisman made by somebody who doesn't believe what they're doing, who is just doing it mechanically to make money or to fulfill an order, or someone who doesn't have a meaningful relationship or even skin in the game with the people, places, and planetary hierarchy in which they are ensouling, is not going to have the same effect as a truly dedicated practitioner. It's good to know a little bit about who it really is that's making the talismans, what they stand for, and what they hope the effects are for you in your own life. For me, I only talk about this magic and sell talismans because it's helped me tremendously in ways I never imagined, and I like to be able to offer that to others who need this kind of specific solution. When to buy a talisman versus when to do something else. Now, I'm going to say something that may sound counterintuitive to somebody who does sell talismans, and that is vehemently believing not everybody should be solving their problem with astrological talismans. Sometimes a talisman is not the right tool. And if there is a better approach, a better form of astrological remediation that is more suited to the issue at hand, then you're using the talisman to avoid the real work that needs to get done. Or it's just going to be a band-aid to a longer running problem. And we'd like to provide permanent solution. A talisman is quite excellent for those who have already done a baseline level of mundane groundwork. Someone who has already gone from 0 to 1 and 1 to 2 and needs that help going from 2 to 20,000. If your business is struggling and if you haven't fixed your operations, your offer, the product or service that you sell, a Jupiter or Sun talisman will not be changing that overnight. It may help opportunities find you, but if your foundation isn't at a baseline already, it's like pouring water into a bucket with holes at the bottom. You'll be unable to capture the full extent of the benefit it could provide. A talisman is quite appropriate, though, when you are put up against forces that are way beyond your control. Legal outcomes, reputation in the eyes of others, receiving a jolt of motivation to tackle a big project, and even the presence of your magnetism. Really, any situation where strategic action and thinking alone isn't the key determinant in the success of your endeavor. Talismans can be quite effective when there are gaps that the celestial forces can insert themselves in to raise the overall quality or magnitude of your result. Ultimately, a talisman may not be the best tool if discipline is the primary solution. If you need to practice more, train more, get better at your craft, attempt to do that first. Are you able to get traction? What is preventing you from doing that? Critically analyze this before using a talisman to solve the problem. That Mars talisman I made was during the pandemic because the company I was running was part of a severe legal dispute. I had already talked to the lawyer, drafted the documents, and had initial conversations with our negotiating party. But I needed that extra oomph, understanding, and expertise to make sure I wasn't leaving anything out so we could have a beneficial result for all parties involved. In this scenario, I wasn't using the talisman as a shortcut or method of cheap success. I was using it to shore up any deficiencies and fill in any missing pieces. And to certain people, this point is also very controversial. A talisman is not appropriate if you're using it to avoid growth. I see this way too often. People are buying talisman after talisman, thinking it's going to magically transform their lives and make them feel truly happy or fulfilled. But the issue is actually something much, much deeper. It's these scenarios I find most common that the talismans and the celestial spirits end up running these people's lives for them. Thus, these talismans really become more of a distraction or avoidance mechanism rather than that powerful ally or that tool that allows us to accomplish the goal that we are striving and setting out to do in the world. I am a very results-oriented individual, so this is how I enjoy approaching talismans. The difference between benefic and malefic talismans. Now let me address one of the most misunderstood aspects of this art, and that is the difference between a malefic talisman and a benefic talisman. In traditional astrology, we talk about how Jupiter and Venus are benefic planets, generally supporting good. And we talk about how Saturn and Mars are malefic planets, the planets in charge of disease, suffering, destruction, all of the nasty, uncomfortable aspects of life. The Sun and Mercury occupy a middle ground more or less, being more malefic and benefic based off of other aspects in the chart. The Moon is also generally considered a benefic supporting planet. And it's important to know that these benefic and malefic natures are describing the natural characteristics of the planets, not necessarily some moral judgment attached to them. To understand how these planets will actually play out in our lives, we should be evaluating them according to one's natal chart. One may find themselves in a scenario where a malefic talisman, say that of Mars, could provide very benefic, positive, life-giving results in their life if they use it. And for those who are well-versed in Hellenistic astrology, one may also find that ideas and notions of out-of-sect malefics and sect lights don't always correspond to one's ability to use or not use those kinds of talismans. One should be asking the talisman maker to evaluate these on a case-by-case basis with the talismans they made and an individual's natal chart for a more and most comprehensive analysis and recommendation. Common issues with talismans. Now let's run through some of the most common observations and mistakes I see both with makers on the market, people I've met, as well as my own mistakes. Number one is the unensouled object or the failure to start talisman. This is a common problem in the commercial talisman market. Say someone who carves a planetary image on a very nice ring, puts it in a fun little package and sells it as a talisman, even though they didn't use an election, ensoul it with any ritual, or say any prayers or hymns over it. This ultimately is just an amulet or a fancy piece of jewelry. This isn't an astrological talisman, as we've been discussing, and so we shouldn't be expecting it to give those results. And it won't give those results because there's nothing inside, nothing ensouled to produce it. Number two, an insufficient election. Let's say the talisman was made during an election, but it wasn't quite good enough. Maybe the moon was too slow. Maybe the main significator is applying too harshly to a malefic. Maybe the ascendant ruler, co-lord of the chart, is afflicted, and we have a vampiric talisman who's secretly sucking the life force out of the one who has bought it. Ultimately, these are talismans that are weak or corrupted to some degree and are not going to be producing the results one likes and may even be secretly sabotaging the life that we have already built. Number three, the overpromised talisman. A situation where the seller really overpromises the result. This sun talisman will make you famous. Sure, indeed, all sun talismans have that capacity. But fame requires a unique set of circumstances in order to actually happen and bear fruit in someone's life. Sure, it may help you be seen more clearly by those in power, but true fame requires effort, showing up, and being a public presence. As always, if a seller's promise sounds too good to be true, then it probably is. Now, the tradition does talk about truly miraculous events being possible because of the astrological talismans. De Imaginibus, on Images, discusses an ancient city of human civilization that was created using the principles of making astrological talismans. This city became a glorious center for learning and trade and all of the best parts of human existence. Yes, of course, it does sound a little too utopian, but if this is the upper echelon of results practitioners are trying to achieve, then at least a percentage of that should be possible. I've been blessed to experience very positive results, beyond what I believed I was individually capable of accomplishing. Maybe that's just me, but I'm certainly in the camp of attributing a lot of my success and opportunity due to my practice of making talismans in this way. Lastly, 4, practitioner incompatibility. This is referencing problems with the natal chart that we've already talked a bit about. A talisman that works incredibly well for one person won't necessarily work perfectly for another. This could be due to the natal chart. This also could be due to one's unique spiritual relationships with the planetary hierarchies themselves. Certainly, astrological talismans give us more wiggle room to negotiate our fate. But for some people, it's more fixed than others. And this is the reality of life. How to dispose of a malefic talisman. For anyone who engages in the use of astrological talismans, there will become a time when the talisman has done its work or something has arisen which shows it is time for us to dispose of the talisman. Perhaps it has completed its work. Perhaps we have moved on from needing it in our lives. And even, hopefully not, perhaps, and this is the most serious case, it is creating effects in our lives that we cannot tolerate. It's important to know that disposing of a talisman is not like throwing away or gifting a piece of jewelry. It is the death of an ensouled object. You are ending a relationship with the spirits and those in charge of the care of that spirit at a celestial level. Much like how people handle their own dead, it is quite common to ceremoniously wrap your talisman in some sort of burial attire, whether it be a respectful piece of cloth or even its own burial vessel, and taking it to a place of last rest, maybe a local cemetery. It is also a common practice to return these to the ocean, to the sea. Some practitioners include an offering, coins, whiskey, a last bit of incense, thanking them for your time together and giving homage and respect to the relationship that was created, regardless if it was beneficial or even potentially malefic. It is this space of respect and honoring that ensures that All debts between you and the planetary hierarchy are fixed and fulfilled, and nothing will be lingering post-talisman disposal. What we don't do is throw it in the trash. If you have a talisman that is causing you problems, you do not gift them to somebody else, even if you truly believe that it could benefit them. A living talisman is not going to just deactivate because you neglect it or don't think about it. It is alive. If you are uncertain whether a talisman is creating benefic or malefic effects in your life, I would recommend erring on the side of caution and the side of disposal. You can always commission or buy another talisman. You can't get back the time and life you spent under afflicted circumstances. You are always worth more than any talisman you have. Your well-being and livelihood is always more important than whatever a spirit or a planet is telling you otherwise. A talisman, when made correctly, with proper materials, suffumigations, prayers, and a great election, is one of the most powerful magical tools we have ever discovered in the so-called Western esoteric magical tradition. These talismans, when properly made, represent a living connection and commitment to the celestial powers of the universe that govern all of reality. Thus, they deserve to be treated with the gravity and respect it implies. But the marketplace is full of shortcuts, and it always has, even in the ancient days when talismans were being made. Truly nothing new under the sun. Shortcuts in this art and tradition create objects which are talisman-shaped but soulless. A stone with a glyph does not a talisman make. A beautiful ring with a planetary image, not made under an election, is not an astrological talisman according to this tradition. Any promise made to you about a talisman that doesn't involve looking at your natal chart, and most importantly, your life circumstances and experiences, is not taking into consideration the full scope of what's going on. Now, if you're considering buying a talisman or looking to make one yourself that takes into account your ideas, desires, your natal chart, and your own life circumstances, I've developed a 12-step checklist to help people process and think through some of these considerations themselves. This walks you through the details I've discussed today and transforming them into actionable details that you can move forward from. And if you would like to work more directly with me and either purchase a talisman or have a consultation where we look at your chart to determine an ideal talisman for you and what that could look like, I've also shared information down below for you to review. Now, I take this work very seriously, both as serious as the texts demand and as my gurus and teachers expect of me. So I only recommend talismans that I believe will truly work for the benefit of the individual and the goals they're looking to accomplish. Because in business, maybe you can fool people from time to time, but who you can never fool are the planets. If you can hold your integrity with the planets, their secrets are open to you.